Hey everyone, it's Eli Shmuel again, and it's great to be back doing another learning. This is the first of two videos I'll be doing on the 10 Principles of Faith, as developed by the 12th century Karaite sage Yehudah Hadassi. Most Jews today are familiar with Maimonides' 13 Principles of Faith, but Yehudah Hadassi's 10 Principles of Faith were actually written before Maimonides' 13 Principles. And the Karaites had a long tradition of defining principles of faith, as Yehudah Hadassi himself tells us that his own principles were derived from his Karaite predecessors. It is important to note that Hadassi was not writing principles of faith for Karaite Jews, rather he was developing principles of faith for all Jews. Other Karaites and Rabbinites have developed their own versions of the principles of faith, and in the Karaite community today, they teach principles of faith that are slightly different from Hadassi's. But in these videos, we just focus on Yehudah Hadassi's 10 principles because Hadassi's principles, especially principles 6 and 7, reflect uniquely Karaite attitudes toward faith and learning. I'm also focusing on Hadassi's principles because I think it is important for people to understand and have access to the classical Karaite works. And I hope that one day, someone will do a scholarly translation of these works, including Yehudah Hadassi's works, for English-speaking audiences. Yehudah Hadassi sets forth his articles of faith in his work Eshkol HaKofer. Eshkol HaKofer means the cluster of henna and is a reference to Song of Songs 1:14. My beloved is unto me is a cluster of henna in the vineyards of En Gedi. In this video, we are actually only going to discuss the first 5 principles of faith, and then we'll pick up on principles of faith 6 to 10 in our next video. Some of the textual and philosophical explanations I bring here in this discussion were mentioned by Hadassi himself, and others were mentioned by other Karaite commentators. So let's get started. Hadassi's first principle focuses on God as the creator, and in Hadassi's words, we must understand the uniqueness of God's creation and wisdom, because God is the creator who causes life and death. At its heart, the first principle of faith is that the God of Israel founded the entire world with his endless wisdom and infinite power. After Hadassi affirms that God is the creator of the world, Hadassi next describes the attributes of God. The attributes of God are significant to Hadassi because we live in a physical world, and Hadassi wants to emphasize that God is not physical, but rather he is spiritual. Hadassi explains that God is powerful, knowing, existent, and that there is none like him. This principle incorporates a few main ideas, which we'll address here. So the first one is that God has no figure and does not resemble anything in the world, as it is written in Isaiah chapter 40 verse 18. To whom then will you liken God, or what likeness will you compare unto him? And in verse 25, to whom then will you liken me, that I should be equal, saith the Holy One. From these verses we know that God is not corporeal, but spiritual. There is no comparison to him. Whenever the Bible gives a description of his actions, such as ascending, descending, seeing, listening, etc., these are always understood as metaphors, allegories, written in the language of mankind, so that people will understand the intention. For instance, in Exodus 2:24 it says, "And God heard their groaning." Of course, this verse doesn't mean that God has ears in order to hear, he neither has eyes for sight, nor mouth to speak. It simply means that he, God, knew about the difficulties of the children of Israel in their bondage. In these examples, the Torah describes God in terms that we, mankind, can understand, so that the Torah's message and the intent become clear. He is Almighty. That's the second part of Principle 2. This simply means that God's ability is unlimited. And finally, that God is one. Not only is he one by himself, but also he cannot ever be replaced. We all know the famous verse, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Elohenu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. The Karaite Jews of Egyptian descent actually have several melodies for the Shema. I've asked my friend Rotem Cohen to record the Shema using one of the traditional Karaite Jewish melodies.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
After Hadassi establishes that God is the creator and that God is all-powerful, he sets forth his third principle of faith, that the entire universe was created out of nothing. In other words, this principle emphasizes the belief in the creation of our world from nothing, that is, ex nihilo. As a practical matter, this means that everything in the world, earth and sky and all which exists within them, were created and did not exist before the creation. Hadassi's first three principles establish that there is an all-powerful creator who created everything in the world. So Hadassi's first principle explains that God sent Moses as a prophet. Hadassi explains that the reason that God sent Moses and the other prophets after Moses is so that we can know the awesomeness of God's Torah, and so that we may understand what is required of us. Moses is the patriarch and head of all prophets. There has never been, nor will there ever be, a prophet like him, as it's written in Deuteronomy 34:10. And there hath not arisen a prophet since in Israel like unto Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. This verse is actually part of the traditional Karaite liturgy, and a member of the congregation sings it during every Shabbat morning service. Here is Rotem Cohen again, reciting this verse in the traditional Karaite Jewish melody.
ולא קם נביא עוד בישראל כמשה, אשר ידעו אדוני פנים אל פנים.
Hadassi's fifth principle, and the last one we are going to cover today, is that God gave Moses the Torah. As Hadassi describes it, the Torah is truth, and all the words of the Torah are truth. Of course, in the Karaite perspective, the Torah which Moses received from God is one pure, whole, written Torah. In the words of Psalms 19:8, the Torah of the Lord is perfect. Torat Adonai Temima. The completeness and pureness of the Torah is one reason why God forbids us to add or subtract from the Torah, not even a single sign, as written in Deuteronomy 4:2. You shall not add unto the word which I command you, neither shall you diminish from it. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this explanation of Yehudah Hadassi's first 5 principles of faith. That's it for this learning, and we'll pick up on the remaining 5 principles of faith next time. Thank you for dropping by, and God bless you all.